Perimenopause is a neurological transition as much as it is a reproductive and hormonal one. And today we're breaking down why brain fog, memory slips, focus issues, maybe why you feel like you have ADHD, and all of the brain symptoms that many of us experience in perimenopause and menopause actually happen. And we're going to talk about what you can do about it so that you can feel clearer and calmer and like you're more in charge of your brain rather than your brain has exited the building. But listen, this is relevant to lots of women. So if you have primary ovarian insufficiency, you're using Lupron or other medications that shut down your ovaries for endometriosis or adenomyosis management, if you've had a hysterectomy or you've lost your hormones for any reason, you need this episode because we're going to also talk about what happens when we lose our hormones too soon in life. So here's where we're going to go in today's podcast episode. We're going to talk about how changing hormones change your brain chemistry and the way that your brain is functioning. We're going to talk about why you struggle with brain fog, why you're losing words mid-sentence, and why you feel like you've lost your mental edge or your ability to be as productive, whether that is at work or home life, like you once were. We're going to talk about exciting new supplement ingredients and a formula that's showing big promise in clinical trials. I will help you parse out why do some women feel like they have ADHD and is it actually ADHD? And I'll be sharing a bit of my own personal journey because losing my hormones and losing my mind, this is something that's hitting really close to home. And listen, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll be putting key studies and graphics to help you further understand this topic. And if you're not watching on YouTube, you might want to pop over there to see the graphics that I'm providing. And I put the studies on the screen. But as always, the studies will be in the show notes at drbrighten.com, drbrighten.com. And the graphics and the studies showing up on YouTube videos, that's something new we're trying. So if you like it, definitely let me know. If it's helpful, I'd love to hear more about it. If you're new here or you're joining again, welcome. This is the Dr. Brighten Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Jolene Brighten. I'm board certified in naturopathic endocrinology, which means I'm an integrative hormone doctor. I'm a nutrition scientist, a best-selling author of several books, and your friendly translator between hormones and real life. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider taking just a minute to leave a review. I know it seems like this really small thing, but I promise you, it's huge for a podcast that's hosted by a woman who is trying to rise above the noise in the podcast and the overall internet space and ensure that women's voices are heard and centered in topics of women's health. If you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Let's hang out because we do the show twice weekly. And as always, your feedback guides the conversation. So leave me a comment. Let me know. What do you want to hear more of? What helped you? Where do we need to go in a deeper dive? So with all of that said, let's dive in. Perimenopause is a significant phase of a woman's life. It's a multi-year phase. Estimates say 7 to 10 years. For some, it could be 15 years before your final period happens. So when we are in perimenopause, estrogen is fluctuating wildly and progesterone is on its slow decline. You may still be cycling, but estradiol is not predictable and progesterone is going low, making it harder for you to feel calm, get good sleep, maybe not say the things you think in your head, the things you shouldn't say out loud, maybe you're saying them out loud. And we'll talk about why progesterone declining does that to your brain. But what you need to know is that all of this is a perfect storm for symptoms that you start noticing in terms of your brain's function. Now, I want to go through a quick brain chemistry tour from the perspective of hormones so that we're all on the same page. I just said estradiol. That is your predominant estrogen while you're still cycling. It is a powerful neuromodulator. It helps tune dopamine, which is focus and motivation. It helps with serotonin, which is our mood, and also plays a role in resilience. It's involved with acetylcholine, which is helping our learning and our working memory. So when estradiol swings, attention and word finding and executive functions, we're going to talk a little bit more about, those can start to falter. Now, estrogen is going to be going up and down until you get into the late phase of perimenopause, at which point it's going to be dropping, dropping, dropping. You stop having periods when we count 12 months, and on month 12, happy anniversary of no periods, you're in menopause. The next day, you're postmenopausal. At that point, your estrogen is gone. And so in this phase of estrogen being sporadic, your brain function becomes unpredictable. As it declines, we're going to get more into what the research says about how that affects your brain energy and your brain function overall. But I want to talk about progesterone and testosterone because estrogen is like having its moment, and that's great. Love that for estrogen, but we can't forget about these other hormones that our ovaries are producing as well. Now, the only way that you make progesterone from your ovaries is following ovulation. It is only present in sufficient amounts during the luteal phase. You must ovulate, make a corpus luteum, that makes progesterone. So in perimenopause, when you're running out of eggs, you're ovulating a whole lot less frequently, or even when you ovulate, that corpus luteum is a little weak in its job, you don't manufacture progesterone. Now, progesterone gets converted in the body to allopregnenolone, which we lovingly call allo. Allo acts on the GABA receptors in your brain, which is the calm down system. When progesterone and allo are dropping, you're going to feel edgy, less stress resilient for sure, and sleep can suffer. And what we can see is that as we feel less chill, less calm, we become more reactive, that can activate the HPA axis. So hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is your stress system. I will link to episodes about cortisol and about insulin that I've done. These are two very important hormones in the brain discussion, but today I want to focus specifically on what's happening in the ovaries. Testosterone. Yes, women make it. I don't care what the FDA says, but testosterone declines gradually. That's going to start, it could start as early as our 20s, but definitely our 30s. And yes, it influences our sexual motivation, but it also influences our energy, our boundary setting. It plays a lot of roles in our brain as well. In midlife, we see a drop in testosterone plus estradiol changes, and that's affecting our libido, but also our get up and go and feeling like we have enough energy in the day. Also, starting and following through on projects. That can be related to testosterone as well. If you don't know what my reference was to the FDA when I started talking about testosterone, it's this. The FDA has approved testosterone therapy for women, but specifically only for hypoactive sexual desire disorder. You're not in the mood to have sex and it's really stressing you out. They have not approved it for cognition, not for muscle loss, not for mood changes. But it's wild to me that in 2025, the FDA is still not recognizing the necessity of testosterone for women. So if you are concerned about your testosterone, this is when we definitely need to test total and free testosterone and a sex hormone binding globulin. Why? Because even once your ovaries call it quits, they retire, your adrenal glands can pump out some DHEA, and we can test that via DHA sulfate or DHAS, and that can get converted into testosterone. So not everybody loses their testosterone, but if you do, it's a problem. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. A lot of times when we talk about perimenopause and menopause, it's a lot of like, here's all the bad things that happen. Okay, some bad stuff does go down, but preventable in some cases. And what I want to focus on is telling you the truth of the science and what to expect and what like our grandmothers should have told our mothers, should have told us when it comes to this phase of life. But I want you to know that your brain is plastic. Not like cheap junk jewelry plastic, but plastic as in it's adaptable and it can change. And we will talk about strategies to help support that. Now, there is no doubt that hormone replacement therapy, especially estrogen introduced within the critical window, can help with mitochondrial function. It may help with dementia prevention. It is helping with your brain energy. And so overall, estrogen, very good for the brain. But as I just demonstrated, progesterone is as well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time today talking about hormone therapy or menopause hormone therapy because we've done it before. And I will link in the episode show notes at drbrighten.com the episodes that do that, because there's a lot of other things that I want to talk to you about. And yes, hormone therapy should be considered. Yes, hormone therapy is important, but it's not for everyone. So I want to give you other options as well. And as a reminder, as estrogen declines, we become less sensitive to insulin. We can see insulin dysregulation, even insulin resistance, and that can absolutely impact how our brain functions. So I will link to the episodes on perimenopause weight loss, the insulin episode, because those are really important for you to understand as well. And if you missed it, we did a 2-part sleep series where I talked about your hormones and your sleep, and that's going to be important as well. Okay, so I just want people to know this, because if you're like, why is she not covering these really important things? Because we've done it, and I'm gonna put together like a whole compilation of episodes for you that will make you unstoppable in your brain health, because you will have the ability to master your hormones and what it takes to have a healthy brain. Now, when it comes to perimenopause, especially the late phase and menopause, women will report things like losing words, especially nouns, walking into a room, completely blanking out, mixing up words, having a slower recall. And I want you to know you're still brilliant. Your brain is just struggling with energy, and it's going through a remodeling. A hormonal transition means a brain transition as well. So I want you to think of the hormone-influenced brain changes more like a software update, not a hardware failure. This is like you're updating your iOS, but it's your brain. And so when you're updating software, right, things can lag. You can get that pinwheel spinning and it takes forever. You might have to restart some apps. And so as we're approaching it this way, we want to think about how we can support the system. So like sleep, movement, protein, fiber, stress, certain cognitive tools, all in order to basically smooth out the performance as the update finishes. Now, unfortunately, this update can last for like 5 years for some people. So I'm definitely going to give you some things that you can do today. But I want to get into what is actually happening with your hormones. And we're going to get really sciencey at times, and then I'm going to explain it a little more simply. And then, of course, in the comments, if you're like, could you break it down more? Please tell me, okay? Because I want to bring you the science, but I also want to make it something that's accessible for you. Because presumably, you're listening to this and you potentially have brain fog, and your brain, that system's running a little bit slower. And that doesn't mean that like you're slow or you're dumb. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that I need to repeat things more often and say them in different ways so that we all are on the same page. I want to introduce you to a term known as endocrine aging. And this is where we're looking at your hormones more than your biological age or your birthday. Because as I said, in perimenopause, there's this system upgrade going on, and we are getting a fuel reset as well. And so with endocrine aging, let me say this. This is why it's really important you track your symptoms, because your endocrine aging, where your hormones are at, what they are doing, how they're changing, this influences your brain health, your cardiovascular health, your bone health. And so where your hormone stage is at is more telling than your biological age or your chronological age itself. So we're going to talk more about like what happens when you lose your hormones too early. But there's a lot of instances where women are not bathing in their own hormones, and that is affecting their endocrine age. So before I get into like why this all happens and what you can do about it, I think I should share with you that like I'm not speaking to you just as a clinician or based on my observations or even what I've read in the science. So I have actually gone through these I'm going to call it horrible brain changes myself, because I was put on Lupron, which is a chemical castration or chemical menopause. And that was a treatment for my endometriosis. Now, unlike natural menopause, where you have perimenopause to transition. There's no perimenopause with Lupron. You inject yourself, you go straight into brain fog, losing words, missing meetings, feeling like you're failing. I felt like I was failing every day. I felt like I was failing at everything and failing as a mother because my brain couldn't keep on top of things. And in fact, it was so bad. And this was happening around the holidays. I laugh about it now, but it was not a laughing matter at the time. So I had mistakenly purchased multiple Christmas presents because I couldn't remember I bought them. Like I bought them, wrapped them, had them hidden because I have kids, and totally forgot about it. And the worst of it is that my son had wanted like this giant Lego set, and it was not cheap. And he had asked for it for a very long time. And finally, I was like, "You're at an age, we're going to get this for you." I bought 2. And on Christmas morning, he's opening up 2 Lego sets. And let me tell you, that was a very expensive mistake. And I was past the return window. It was hard. And I was so desperate through all of this. I was doing research. I was ordering gobs of supplements. I was taking anything that I thought could help. And I remember one night I was crying to my husband about how I couldn't even keep up with the supplements. Like I could not even remember to take the supplements, even though I knew they helped when I took them. And I was just crying. And I was like, I could cry right now thinking about how hard it was. So I was like, why is there not just one supplement for my brain? One supplement that's just formulated for a woman who is going through this, who has lost her estrogen, who doesn't have her hormones anymore. And he laughed at me and he's like, you know, that's what you do, right? And I just have to laugh because it hit me that my brain was struggling for the lack of hormones so bad that I forgot yes, I can be the one that makes that. Like I formulate supplements for my company, Dr. Brighten Essentials. And so I spent the last year researching clinical trials and finding the most evidence-based ingredients to make our radiant mind. And I also looked at what I used and what actually helped. And, I look at something like Saffron, and I'm going to talk more about that in this episode, but I was having to take 2 capsules of what I was getting because it just wasn't enough. And it's because there wasn't anything made for women. And I wanted to actually call this formula Focus and Mood because that's what I designed it to do. Because on top of all of the brain fog and the word missing and the financial mistakes I was making, I also was deeply depressed and struggling with anxiety. And so, I'm getting like kind of on a tangent. The whole point of why I'm telling you this is because I don't want you to feel like you're a failure or like you did something wrong if you're struggling with time management, with finding your words, if you're making financial mistakes like I did, like, oh my gosh, I really want to help you because that really hurts. And if you're struggling with things like being able to just plan dinner or any of the day-to-day tasks that become honestly so heavy and hard when we lose our hormones, like I have been there too. And I really regret that it took me being on Lupron to really understand just how hard it is. And I think that's the way it goes sometimes. Like when my patients told me it was hard, I believed them. But it was a lot like when before I had a baby and my patients were like, being a mom is hard and childbirth is hard. And I was like, I believe you. And then I went through it myself and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I thought I knew, but I really had no idea. And that happens for so many of us. You might be 35 listening to this and being like, yeah, okay, this sounds hard. I don't know how to express in words how incredibly difficult it is, how defeating it is, and how awful it is to feel like you are a stranger in your own mind and that you are trapped by a mood that doesn't feel like your own, but because it's a biochemical imbalance happening because of the loss of these hormones. So I'm very passionate about this, and that is why I wanted to do this episode. Many of you were like, I need this episode. And I'm like, yes, we should do this. So let's get into what is happening with the hormones and get into the science of what you should know, hopefully before you're in perimenopause, menopause. But if you're there already, I got you. Brain networks are remodeling during the menopause transition. I've said this a couple of times, so let me break it down what's going on. There's been imaging studies on menopausal brains that have shown specific changes in structure, connectivity, energy metabolism, especially in regions that are driving our memory and our executive function. So the executive function is all about that prefrontal cortex. So executive function, this is something, since I brought it up, I want to say this. So executive function, I've done episodes where I talk all about executive function. I will link to those. Everyone with ADHD has executive dysfunction. So much so that it impacts their relationships, their school, their work, their day-to-day life. Not everybody who has executive dysfunction has ADHD. And so there is a term that's going around the internet and it's incorrect. It's called new onset ADHD, and they're applying it to perimenopause and menopausal women. You can absolutely have brain changes that affect your executive function. So estrogen goes down, mitochondria function goes down, inflammation goes up. And now our executive function is compromised. You can have that, but not have ADHD. If you have a good skilled clinician, they will go back through what it looked like when you were a child. What did it look like when you were a teenager? And there is likely going to be uncovering of issues that you thought were normal, that people ignored, that people told you were lazy, that they told you to suck it up, and that was ADHD. If you had ADHD as a child, but you didn't get diagnosed until 45, you've always had ADHD. If everything was going fine, okay, and I'm not talking about masking fine, compensating fine. I'm talking about you never struggled with significant executive dysfunction that interrupted your day-to-day living, interrupted your ability to be successful in the traditional ways we define success in life, like relationships and school and all of those things. You never had issues. You never struggled with executive dysfunction. By the way, people with ADHD do get married. They have long relationships. They graduate from school. Okay, so that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that executive dysfunction made it so you had to work harder than anyone else around you who was neurotypical. If you didn't have all of that, and now you're experiencing symptoms, what you're having is a decline in estrogen that is affecting your mitochondrial function and is affecting brain inflammation. That is not new onset ADHD. That is estrogen and other hormones, but primarily estrogen affecting your prefrontal cortex where executive functions are run. Executive functions are things like how we manage our time, how we start and finish projects, how we're actually able to look at something really complex, a large project, and plan that out and say, okay, I got to reverse engineer this and figure this all out. It is how we are able to put together a grocery list, go to the grocery store, pick up all the items, not get distracted while we're there. To my ADHD people, come home, remember that you have those food, follow the recipe. Executive function is also how we're able to transition from things. So not being hyper-focused, not feeling super enraged. So, it can look a lot like ADHD, but you need to work with a clinician to rule things out. I get on the internet that diagnosing ADHD is really trendy right now in terms of armchair experts making cute little TikTok clips. Okay, but that doesn't mean ADHD isn't real, but it also doesn't mean everything is ADHD and that you don't need to rule out other things. You can have post-traumatic stress disorder. You can have other issues going on like depression. These can happen with ADHD, by the way. You can have these comorbidities, or you might have something on its own. But the most important thing is to be holistically evaluated so that we understand, is it something else? Or is it ADHD alone? Or is it ADHD with other things? Because that is the way you get the best treatment for your brain. Now, as I go through this science, it's going to be really easy for you to understand how some doctors are missing. They're not experts in ADHD. So when you see a gynecologist who's like, I think you have ADHD, that doesn't mean it's a diagnosis. that means that you need a referral. You're going to see how it's really easy that it could be mistaken for ADHD, but also why we see such a phenomenon of women in their 40s plus getting diagnosed finally with ADHD. Because with ADHD, you already had executive dysfunction, you already had mitochondria mayhem, and you already had neuroinflammation was up, and you already had problems with brain energy production. So now we put you in perimenopause and everything just got way, way worse. Now, let's go back to the concept of endocrine aging. So again, more than just chronological aging, and it is reflective of the metabolic adaptation that's happening in the brain. So just because you're having these symptoms, I want to say to you very clearly, that doesn't mean that you have dementia. It isn't cut and dry that you should be on Google being like, oh, wow, I'm having these, cognitive changes. I must have dementia. You need to see a doctor to make sure that you are working that up. So while I may say you may just have a brain energy issue, I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. You want to definitely meet with your doctor to understand that. So through the lens of endocrine aging, let's look at perimenopause. So our ovaries send uneven amounts of hormones out. The brain signals are becoming, basically your brain starts yelling at your ovaries. Your ovaries are in retirement. They're like, we're on our way out. We don't even care. Like, stop talking to us. Why are you so loud? So we've got that happening with the ovaries. Then we see that because the estradiol and progesterone are becoming erratic, unpredictable, you can't depend on them sometimes. Your brain circuits that do depend on those hormones, they have to start adapting and changing. So they're like, we can't count on these hormones. We have to change and get ready for those hormones to no longer be here. Keep in mind that two women at the same age can have very different endocrine ages, where one can still have stable ovarian function and another can be very deep in the transition. So if you're 48 and you're like, I'm not having any of this stuff, but my friend who's 45 is talking about it all the time and it's so horrible and I don't understand, it's because your chronological age doesn't matter as much as the endocrine age. So your hormone producing glands, those are your endocrine glands, how advanced are they in aging? And specifically when we talk about the ovaries, it's all about how many eggs were you born with and what environmental impacts have impacted your eggs and what are your genetics. Now, your stage of hormone change will predict brain symptoms. So brain fog, word finding, sleep disturbance. And that's going to do it better than your birth certificate age. And so again, this is why a 43-year-old who's already in late perimenopause can feel more foggy than a 53-year-old who's past the transition, because their brain has already adapted and it is steady again. So we are going to talk about that. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I mentioned the term metabolic adaptation. This doesn't mean that your brain is dysfunctional or damaged in some way, and so it has to change and compensate. It means your brain is adjusting to how it uses fuel and how it's responding and interacting with your hormones. This is why I recommend creatine at least 5 grams a day, not just for in the gym because it can help exercise, but also for brain energy. I recommend this to women who have ADHD. I take it myself because I'm ADHD and I'm 44. But also I recommend it for perimenopause and menopausal women. It is what we hypothesize is that it can be used to build the energy from the mitochondria. Now, what your brain is doing in that late stage perimenopause is it's shifting how efficiently neurons are using glucose. So blood sugar, glucose, your fuel in the brain. And support cells, the glia cells, they help balance energy. There's also a shift in the efficiency of them as well. There's also this retuning of the neurotransmitter system. So when these hormones start getting all sporadic, it's like a piano out of tune. And your brain's got to go in and be like, let's retune this old dopamine, serotonin, GABA system that has been relying on estrogen and progesterone as you've been cycling. Your brain is also rewiring connections. That's the plasticity, so that networks run smooth again once your hormones settle out. So as your estradiol is fluctuating, that disturbs your memory circuit. So remember we said estradiol, E2, predominant hormone while we are cycling, that is linked to dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine. And those neurotransmitters, they are dependent on what estradiol is doing. I like to, she's basically the it girl, and these neurotransmitters follow her around. So this is impacting your working memory and also your verbal learning. When your estradiol swings in perimenopause, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, their connectivity and their performance will begin to struggle. So that can be seen as small, measurable dips in your processing speed, so how quickly your brain is working, and in your verbal memory. And that is linked to word recall. And if you're with me on YouTube, you're looking at the science right now on the screen that says that. Now, as I said, women with ADHD may feel this impact the most since there is already an underlying neurotransmitter dysregulation, there's executive dysfunction, and there's energy issues and how they actually are able to run energy in their brain. Now, I mentioned GABA earlier. GABA is the calm down signal. And when that drops because progesterone and aloe aren't there in the right amounts, we can definitely feel more anxious, have trouble sleeping, much more amped up. So progesterone is metabolized into the neurosteroid, aloe, and that is positively modulating GABA receptors. If you're like, no, progesterone doesn't do that for me, I'm going to link in the show notes to the progesterone intolerance episode. You need to watch that. Now, across reproductive transitions, including menopause, aloe dysregulation is linked to mood and cognitive vulnerability. So keep that in mind. Progesterone changing and not being there, that affects the brake system. So your brain has a built-in calm brake, and that is GABA. That is what GABA is doing. So ideally, we would start women in perimenopause as soon as they start having a loss of that brake on progesterone, oral micronized progesterone, because that's what's going to get metabolized to aloe. Now, in perimenopause, there's been scans that suggest that the prefrontal cortex, that the part of it specifically that helps with focus, filters distractions, regulates reactions, so we're not so volatile, it may have less calming GABA signaling. So again, these are some of those executive functions that people with ADHD struggle with that now come up in perimenopause, not because you have ADHD, but because of the changes in your brain. Not saying you do or don't have ADHD. You have to get that worked up by a provider. But what you should know is that if you have less reliable calm brake system, your mind is going to feel noisier, jumpier, more reactive, and self-control will take more brain energy. This is why, perimenopause women are like, I just don't care. I don't give AF because their GABA systems are changing. They don't have that stop brake. They don't have that filter. That doesn't mean they're not responsible for their actions. And that doesn't mean that something is wrong with them either. It really is just honestly, they don't have the energy to keep up the facade of like being a super polite, good girl who gets walked all over every day. And that I think is something I've always said. I mean, back when I was in my 30s, I was like, I take notes from my 40-plus-year-old patients who are just like, I set boundaries. I will not be a doormat. I will not people please. And I'm like, we should all embrace that so much sooner. But let's talk a little bit more about what this actually looks like in your day-to-day. When these hormones change, they affect your executive function, your memory, how your brain's operating. So firstly, attention. You're opening up your laptop to write one email. 5 tabs later, you can't remember why you started. Slack pings you, if you know, or your kid's noise yanks your focus instantly. So it's really easy to become distracted. The brain is not focusing, it's not sustaining attention. Again, this is often an issue throughout life if you've had ADHD in some way, but now if you have ADHD, it is so bad because perimenopause is so hard for the ADHD brain. But if you don't have ADHD, you also are experiencing this, but maybe not to the same degree and not for the same duration of over a lifetime as someone with ADHD. Impulse control. This is something that is a classic ADHD symptom. So you blurt, you interrupt, you hit buy before you meant to. I'm thinking about my story of like financial mistakes. This is not a willpower thing, by the way. It's your brain's brake is lighter. And I think that's important to understand because there's a lot of blame and there's a lot of shame that get put on people for not having impulse control. So if you were classically always interrupting people mid-sentence because you were afraid you're going to lose your thought, you've been seeking novelty and having really poor impulse control with like buying, sometimes drinking alcohol, just doing all the things your whole life, more of an ADHD. If you're just experiencing that now and you're like, what is this phenomenon? Welcome to perimenopausal changes. Now, emotional reactivity, I kind of hate ever talking about this one because sometimes jerks on the internet use it as fuel against women and like they don't really hear me when I'm talking about the science of things, but you can be more emotionally reactive. Small stressors feel really big. You snap at things, and then you feel guilty. That happening before your period, that is because of GABA. That's because of the GABA system. And so there's always this characterization of like, oh, perimenopausal women are crazy. They're not crazy. They just don't have the energy and the capacity to deal with BS anymore. The other thing we should talk about is task switching. So task switching, we should be able to stop one thing, smoothly just transition into doing another, like going from doing the dishes to bedtime routine. When your executive function is struggling, you don't have the brain fuel. Oh, that is really hard. And so this is where I will often recommend things. I'm going to say a timer, but if you have ADHD and you're listening to me, I'm not saying you solve your life with a timer, but this is something that so I have a preteen boy in my house. He's my son. He has ADHD. Transitions are really, really hard for him. And this is something I do with him. And I also recommend for patients. So you set a timer. You're in your hyper focus. You're like, I'm doing the thing I wanted to do all day. I'm super, super happy. Okay. You're hyper focused. You're going to get really angry if somebody interrupts you. I get really angry when my husband's like, we should go to bed. And it's really abrupt. I'm like doing something and he's like, we should go to bed. And I'm like, I have such a hard time with that. Like, don't tell me what to do. And also I can't transition right now. So here's what works. Okay. So setting a timer that's like, you should think about the transition. So we're going to transition in the next 5 minutes. So the first timer is like, hi, you're going to transition in the next 5 minutes. The next timer goes off and it's like, okay, it's time to start your transition. And sometimes you need a third timer that's like, we've transitioned, okay? The transition has happened. And that allows your brain your brain should have its own little mechanisms for being like, it's time to transition. Let's go, friend. It doesn't have that. So you've got to put some artificial ones in place to help prompt your brain. I want to talk about sensory issues, but I want to note that the DSM no longer recognizes emotional dysregulation as an ADHD symptom, and it doesn't recognize that sensory overload, sensory sensitivities are specific to ADHD. Lots of people with ADHD report it. It may very well just be on its own ADHD phenomenon, or it could be other things going on, like a co-occurring autism diagnosis as well. So what I do want to say though, is that if you're going into like the grocery store and the lighting, the music, the chatter, the people are making you feel overwhelmed, that's sensory overload. If you go to a restaurant and you're like, I can't stay here because the people talking, they sat me in a bad chair, people are rushing past me all the time. If you can't work because your desk is cluttered or a cluttered room feels overwhelming, those are sensory issues that can come up. And we do see that being a problem. It's more extreme, autism and neurodivergent brains, but it can happen in perimenopause. The other thing you might notice is that you're tired but wired in the evening. You want to sleep, but your brain will not downshift and you're having 2 a.m. wake ups. You want to see the sleep episode for sure. Sleep fragmentation is super common in perimenopause. I also did a episode on ADHD and sleep issues because you probably had sleep issues your whole life if you have ADHD. But something that's very unique to perimenopause is having hot flashes and hormone swings that are slicing up your sleep. And so this sleep that you should be getting is what helps memory stick and helps your focus the next day. But it's getting chopped up because you're having these night wakings and even brief cuts, okay, to that deep sleep. Yeah, and I realize not everybody can see me doing my hands chopping here, but I'm doing hand chopping. So even just brief night wakings, these brief cuts that are chopping up your deep sleep and your REM sleep can make you foggy the next day. You also might feel awful, like you didn't get rest at all. And you can be feeling really sluggish mentally and physically. Even when you do a lab test and everything looks normal, it can all go back to your sleep. So the hot flash related night waking, it's an estrogen linked sleep disturbance, and that can fragment your sleep. So it's messing with your slow wave, your deep sleep, your REM sleep. And these are states that are very vital for memory consolidation and for you to have attention the next day. So that will often produce daytime complaints that are disproportionate to these subtle changes, and that we can see on objective tests. So recent reviews in menopausal populations highlight this particular sleep disruption to brain dysfunction pathway. So struggling with your brain. And sometimes you don't even remember that you are waking up because the hot flash is just like this mini little wake up and you flush and you jolt awake and it's only for a few seconds. But even if you don't remember it, that sleep is still getting chopped up. And that's where wearable technology can be really helpful. So I wear an Oura Ring. I also have an Apple Watch. It can help you understand, are you waking up? There are certainly times that I will sometimes look at my sleep the next day and I'm like, no, but I thought I was sleeping. I don't remember waking up, but I see all these little night wakings that have happened. This was especially apparent postpartum for me. When I had my second son at 40, I had hot flashes and night sweats in that early postpartum, which is normal because you lost a placenta, which means you lost your estrogen factory. And yeah, it can be disruptive. So I want you to understand that these fragments in your sleep, these chops, they're hitting you in two places. So the deep sleep, the slow wave, and that is when your brain and your body repair and you're backing up your hard drive, basically. So you're consolidating your memories. So we talked about the deep sleep and we talked about REM. REM sleep is part of our emotional processing, and it's where we're filing memories away. So these two particular types of sleep, if we're not hitting them, are going to have a significant impact on how our brain functions. And the thing that is unique about these estrogen swings is that it not only makes it easier to break these sleep stages, but it also is making it harder to re-enter them. So you're getting less continuous deep and REM sleep. And that's even when the total number of hours in bed look okay. So you're like, wait, I went to bed at 9. I didn't wake up till 6. Everything should be fine. This is where having wearable technology data, if you can afford that, if you have access to that, can be really helpful to understand what is actually going on with your sleep. So far, we've talked about the hormonal changes leading to brain remodeling. We've talked about sleep. I want to just go over how not getting enough good sleep might show up for you the next day. So firstly, your memory slips. Names, words don't stick. You reread the same line over and over and you're like, what does it even say? If you feel like your attention is just not there altogether, or it's really hard, so small distractions are derailing you, task switching is really clunky. One of my tips, we'll talk about it today, is not to task switch, is to actually work in chunks. I actually just said that to my assistant today. She was like, oh, we have like, you did this set of work this morning, but like, I need you to get me this thing. And can you just one off this? And I'm like, that's actually a whole project. And I have to record this podcast first. And then I can do all of that in a chunk. Other thing you might find is that you're more irritable. You're feeling like stress is hitting harder and your motivation is dipping. This can all just be a result of really poor sleep. And something that is really apparent that sleep has been a problem for you for a long time, and that your adrenal glands and your brain are just getting a divorce, it feels like, is HPA dysregulation. That classic, I'm tired at night, my body's exhausted, but my brain is wired. And caffeine is helping less, and sugar cravings are crazy, and I want salt all the time, and I want to chew things really hard. That can point to HPA dysregulation and cortisol issues coming up. Here's another really big one that late-stage perimenopause and menopausal women report, and that is performance mismatch. So you can't perform because tiny interruptions at the wrong moments are just hijacking your brain. You do not feel as mentally sharp, and you're like, I feel like I'm sleeping well. Why am I not able to perform? And if you actually get into the sleep data, it may be your brain is not getting enough of that restorative time. Sleep is not just when we consolidate memories, by the way, either. It's where we remove metabolic waste. And if we can't remove metabolic waste, like we've got a brain that's really struggling. Now, the good news about everything that we have talked about thus far is the dip in brain function is usually transient and sometimes reversible. So again, we're thinking of perimenopause like a long software update. I'm like, I said a software update, but like this is not happening in an hour, right? So we got the hormones that are changing. It's changing how the brain is functioning. The brain has to adapt, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about it. You think about the fact that, your brain is changing throughout your menstrual cycle, then in perimenopause. It's not just about the ovaries going into retirement. It's also about your brain adaptation. So you're doing a lot. Like, definitely be gentle with yourself. And keep in mind that in most women, this brain lag, this word recall issues, it's temporary. It's just a phase of the brain changing. So after your hormones settle, so following your final period, and now you're going into postmenopause, the brain should have brought some of those skills back, hopefully up to baseline. It's not always the same for everyone, but I want you to recognize, especially if you're in distress, that this is an adaptation time. It doesn't necessarily mean permanent loss. And there was actually a large study called the SWAN study that found that there were modest declines in processing speed, in verbal memory that happened during perimenopause, that even though women were experiencing that, they often found a return to baseline after the transition was done. So ovaries are done, no more periods, everything's done. And so this is consistent with the idea that this is a neural adaptation, a brain adaptation, rather than you permanently losing your performance, your edge, your executive function. This also differentiates from ADHD in that you're just not going to regain your executive function just because now you're in menopause. The question always comes up though, like, how long am I going to have to deal with this? And I have to say, firstly, everyone's different, but I want to give you a bit of a helpful roadmap for you to kind of wrap your head around this. So first, we have early and mid perimenopause. So foggy days are going to come and go, which might be more tied to poor sleep. Stress might hit you worse. That might really pull on your brain a lot more. You may have heavy irregular cycles. So now you're having iron deficiency possibly coming up. That's affecting your brain function. Thyroid issues can come up during this phase. So I don't want you to just assume it's perimenopause, okay? We want to look at what else is going on. But the biggest thing in that early phase is, everything we talked about, progesterone. So there might be some impulse issues, but there can be a lot of rage, a lot of emotional swings, a lot of anxiety, a lot of sleep disturbance. We then transition into late perimenopause, which is, edging towards early menopause diagnosis. And so this is all happening around the final menstrual period. And this is when the biggest dip in mental speed and word recall happens. So if you're in a place right now where you're like, my brain is really struggling, that and your periods are like, 60 days or more apart, that is pointing towards you entering into menopause soon. And that means there's light at the end of the tunnel, because after your periods stop, improvement commonly starts within a few months. It's not like a light switch, okay? But it's a gradual improvement. Many women start to feel back to their personal normal a couple years after their periods have fully stopped. And I know you might be like, hold up. 7-10 years of this perimenopause business and then 2 more years, like that's a long time. It is. Okay, it is. And we have to acknowledge that. It's why you need to be gentle with yourself. And I'm going to talk through, I keep saying I'm going to talk through solutions. I swear I am. I promise. I'm going to talk to you about some things. But I do have to say this. If your brain fog is getting worse and worse and worse, you're having other symptoms like cold intolerance, hair loss, dry skin, sluggish digestion, they need to check your thyroid. If after your periods stop and things are getting worse, they're not getting better, or you're not seeing any improvement at all, you need to ask your clinician to look for contributing factors. And in fact, there's no reason why we can't rule these out earlier as well in perimenopause. So sleep apnea, insomnia, depression, anxiety, thyroid, iron issues, certain medications. So sedating medications, antihistamines, some of these things can definitely contribute. High alcohol use, long COVID, like there can be a lot of reasons why you have brain fog. So again, I don't want you to just say, it's just perimenopause. Like always make sure, it's not just perimenopause, because no one said that you only have to have one thing. So now let's get into the tips about what you can do. So if you are noticing you have word slips and you're having slower recall, consider taking breaks during the day. Your brain needs breaks. So you think about how we exercise, right? I hope you're exercising. We're going to talk about this, really important. But okay, you're doing squats. You do a set, right? You do one set and you rest. During that exercise, your mitochondria is like, go, 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 put out the energy. And then it's like, I need some time to recoup. I gotta pull more substrate from the environment. I gotta recoup. I gotta put out this energy. So your brain is very similar. It's not muscle tissue, but it's working in the same way as the muscle. So with that, I want you to consider how you can build in brain breaks. And if you can couple that with going for a walk, that's such a great stack of a 2-for-1. It's going to help with insulin sensitization. It's going to help with circulation to your brain, and it will ultimately help with your focus. So we got to take the brain breaks, but you may also want to write key nouns or use prompts, have them in your Apple Notes. If you are giving a presentation, use the presenter notes at the bottom. I'm someone all my whole life, I have been really bad with names, not because I don't care to learn someone's name. I can't learn someone's name unless I see it. So at a conference, if someone has a badge on, I have to see that and they say their name. And then I'm like, okay, I got it. That is something that I just tell people, hey, I'm not so good at learning people's names unless I see them. Can I see your badge? Other times I will meet someone, ask them their name, and I try to exchange a contact early on. So I'm writing their name in. So find workarounds and different prompts that help your brain and that you can actually anchor into through this transition period. Now, if your problem is that focus is hard because your brain's noisy, the environment's noisy, everything's noisy. Noise canceling headphones, yes. Silence notifications, yes. But also try working in only 20 to 25 minute sprints. So most brains only have the capacity to really focus on something for 20, 25 minutes. That gives you an opportunity to have those brain breaks we talked about, but also during those sprints, they're literally sprints. That's all you do. So you're 20 minutes, I'm going to answer emails, nothing else. Just emails. Or maybe you're someone who's okay, 20 minutes, I'm just gonna meal plan for the week. Whatever it is you need to focus on, that's all you do in those 20 minutes. You're doing nothing else. I would also encourage you to use body doubling. This is something I am a huge fan of. I know that this is gonna be a crutch for me in late phase perimenopause. Maybe not. I got my radiant mind on lock. So maybe not. I'm really hopeful. So just this last week, I was in my luteal phase. So I was just a few days before my period. I had to make dinner. Nobody was going to eat if my husband did not come and just sit in the room with me. And that's what I said to him. I need you to come in. I need you to just, I know you're working, just sit on your laptop. I just need you to be in the room because I'm so unmotivated, so unfocused. Like I can't work through doing this dinner. And literally no one's going to eat, or we're just going to order takeout. I don't know what it's going to be. And he's like, sure. And he came and he sat there. And just because his body was there, I was like, okay, I can get this done. So this is a whole, if you have ADHD, you're like, yeah, I know about this tip. This is the thing though. If you got diagnosed with ADHD before perimenopause, like you have tools. I hate to be the one to tell you that some of those are no longer going to work and you have to get more tools, but you do have some of these tools, and body doubling is one of those. So whether you are phoning a friend, that helps for going for walks when you're like, yeah, I'm not up for this. Have a phone call. Oh my gosh. I will literally FaceTime my sister when I need to clean my room because then I'm like, oh, well, I'm on the phone anyways. Like, I'm just going to do stuff. It works so well. In this episode, I've mentioned several times how important sleep is to your brain function. So although I have a 2-part sleep episode and then another sleep episode just for ADHD, I do want to talk a little bit about sleep in this episode because you're here. So why not do it, right? If you're struggling with night sweats, 2 a.m. wake ups, we got to check your insulin. You may want to consider oral micronized progesterone. And if you're a candidate for estrogen, we may want to go that route as well, because that can really help with you getting good sleep. But outside of that, cool bedroom, no late night alcohol. Make sure that you are in a relaxed environment. So no stressful TV. And if you can avoid lights that are blue light emitting, like a laptop or any screens, that can really help with your melatonin. The other thing I would say is fix your wake time first. It is really a struggle in perimenopause when you're just like trying to fight going to sleep so much. Like it becomes this battle. If you can then instead set a consistent wake time that you wake up within 15 minutes the same time every day, that can help significantly, because what it will do is will build sleep pressure during the day. So adenosine will build up, that builds sleep pressure, and that will give the signal for you to go to sleep. And so people usually start to notice things like 5 to 7 days of a consistent wake time that they're like, I am actually getting tired at bedtime. And we love that. So that's a few of my tips for you right away. And again, show notes, I got you covered when it comes to sleep. The other thing that's going to help your brain a lot is exercise. We want to get like 150 minutes of aerobic activity a week and 2 days minimum of strength training. And so that exercise will also, if you do it in the morning, it's going to help with your sleep. And if you do it in the morning and you get morning sunlight, that's also going to help with your sleep. But caveat here, if you're getting less than 6 hours of sleep, then that morning sunlight can mess with your circadian rhythm. Literally nobody talks about this. So if you get less than 6 hours of sleep, sunglasses in the morning, you're not going to get exposed to light because that may mess with your circadian rhythm. But if you get more than 6 hours of sleep, then definitely morning sunlight. That will help stoke the circadian rhythm to work for you. And if you haven't already grabbed the perimenopause weight loss plan, drbrighten.com/plan, do that, because that's an anti-inflammatory meal plan. Yes, it's targeted towards weight loss, but what helps weight loss is helping your hormones, helping your sleep, helping your stress, and making sure you're eating an anti-inflammatory diet. We all want to be doing this anyway. So definitely grab that. Now I want to talk about some key supplements that I researched in formulating the Radiant Mind and that I personally take for my brain health. And in this, I'm going to tell you specifically what to look for, because I never want you to feel like you have to buy my supplements or like I'm gatekeeping information from you. If you do choose to purchase the Radiant Mind, there's the code POD15. You can get 15% off your first purchase. And for a limited time right now, we're actually giving a free bottle of Magnesium Plus with it, which I'm gonna talk about magnesium as well, because they go together. It works really well. That means if you're listening to this right now, odds are you can get a free 30 days of magnesium glycinate as a bonus. But I want you to know that it's only a limited time. Please don't be mad at me if you procrastinate, because I know that's what your brain is telling you to do. Don't procrastinate, okay? Maybe that's just me when my hormones are low. Anyhow, let's get into some key supplements that have clinical trials to back them that are showing big promise for brain health, for focus, for mood, for attention. And the very first one is saffron, but just not any saffron, Affron specifically. With this one, we want to aim for 30 milligrams a day. Like I told you before, like I was only finding supplements that had 15 milligrams a day. So I was like having to double up on it. 30 milligrams. That's the sweet spot. At least that's what I found to be the sweet spot. Something really cool about saffron is there have been several human trials, including Affron that I'm talking about specifically, that have shown meaningful improvement in mild depression and anxious symptoms within about 4 to 8 weeks of taking it. So what people often experience is having a steadier mood that makes tasks starting and follow through a whole lot easier, and they just feel happier. Now, if you remember in this podcast, I talked to you about neuroinflammation. So neuroinflammation can rise as estrogen declines, or as part of having ADHD, we do see that there is neuroinflammation. And so saffron has carotenoids that can act as antioxidants and immune modulators. There have been studies, some of which are on lab animals, that show a reduction in oxidative stress and inflammatory signaling. So these are some of the factors that can keep the brain in a noisy state. And so saffron may be able to contribute to a calmer biology that's supporting clearer thinking. What I think is really cool about saffron is that we've got the inflammation effects, we've got the brain effects, but there's also a sleep effect. So there was a Affron randomized clinical control trial that found better self-reported sleep quality. And remember, this matters because when your sleep is improved, your attention, your working memory is improved the next day. Now, keep in mind that these supplements are not medications. They're not drugs. They're not going to work overnight, and they're not intended to treat or cure disease. So what you can expect with taking something like Affron is that there should be a subtle lift in like your overall outlook, in your irritability within a couple of weeks, maybe, 2 to 4 weeks. And then there's a more noticeable mood and mental ease shift that happens about 4 to 8 weeks. But we do want to be doing this on top of sleep and protein and movement and fiber and, all of the things. The supplements, I always say, you can't out supplement a poor diet and lifestyle, and they really are adding rocket fuel to your lifestyle. The other one I want to talk to you about is Citicoline. Specifically, I chose Cognizin for our product, and we're looking at 250 milligrams daily for that because that supports executive function and also the speed in which your brain works. And I like to think about Citicoline like this premium membrane part for neurons. It's a really interesting molecule. So there's been human trials in healthy people that show better attention and faster psychomotor speed. And so you can think about like the start button and the mental tempo you need for planning and prioritizing is supported with this molecule. So if you are the person that has trouble getting started, keeping going on a project, Cognizin is definitely one to be looking at. The other thing about Citicoline as it fits into this conversation of your brain remodeling is, through the perimenopause years, is that there's been research showing that it supports the membrane turnover, so the cells that are turning over, and it helps with the signaling, specifically in the brain areas that drive executive function. So it's a really interesting one when you consider that if we see perimenopause as this brain remodeling time, to bring this in to support remodeling. It's basically like, part of giving your body the building blocks to rebuild. Now, from a mood perspective, what we look at is that potentially by stabilizing the frontal lobe and the energy there and the attention, Citicoline may reduce the mental drag that feels kind of overwhelming. And that is something that is often felt as low mood in perimenopause. So with Citicoline, the mood trials are limited, but what we want to think about primarily is that it helps with cognitive support, which may help your mood feel lighter. And that's why it's a really great molecule to be partnering with Saffron, which we know does have great research supporting its mood effects. The other thing about saffron I didn't even mention is that it can help with your libido. If you read Is This Normal? I talked about in there how sometimes SSRIs can give you a low libido. Saffron can help you overcome that. That's pretty cool. So with Citicoline, if you're taking this, we usually see improvement happening about a month. Some people, it takes up to 3 months for like attention, accuracy, mental snap, if you will, to really markedly improve. But some measures shift as early as 4 weeks. But I like to give people like a realistic understanding of like some things get better in 4 weeks, some things take up to 3 months. And so setting realistic expectations of what it will look like to see improvements with Cognizin, I think is really important. Now, with Bacopa, if you have ADHD, you probably heard about Bacopa because it's like one that like ADHD brains love. And the specific form we're using is Bacognize. I hope I'm saying that right. I look it up all the time and I keep finding different ways of saying it, but it'll be in the show notes. With this particular form of Bacopa, we're looking at 300 milligrams a day, especially when we're wanting to support memory and calm focus, not like amped up focus, but calm focus. So Bacopa works like a bit of a memory trainer. There's been interesting randomized control trials with the particular form of Bacopa that we're using that show improvements in new memory formation, in subjective stress and anxiety. And with this one, it's more like 6 to 12 weeks of use that we really see improvement. But Bacopa shows promise for supporting memory learning, recall, staying on task, so executive functions again. It's also been looked at for brain inflammation and brain health overall. Bacopa has antioxidant and anti-inflammatory actions that may help protect the synapses in the brain. So that is something that could be really useful when hormonal fluctuations are happening and your networks are retuning, rewiring, you're going through that system update. Bacopa may, in fact, help with that. It's something that I'm hoping that we get more research just specific on perimenopause and menopause for these supplements. But right now, I mean, we have so little funding for that overall. But the randomized control trials, which I will link to in the show notes, have been really promising. And overall, these 3 supplements that I just discussed with you, they have been generally well tolerated. Sometimes there's mild GI upset, and that's usually solved with splitting the dose so that you're not taking it all at once. With Bacopa, like I said, it's about 8 to 12 weeks of taking it consistently before you can judge the full effect. That's when typically memory and learning gains are most notable, but they do accrue gradually over time. It just is something that it's subtle shifts rather than just like flipping a switch. And as I'm talking about this, I realize like this is a lot of information to take in. I will put a quick cheat sheet in the show notes about these particular ingredients that I'm talking about, so that if you're someone who's right now struggling because you're not an auditory learner predominantly, I'll give it to you in written as well so that you can see it. So when we're thinking about executive function, like starting things, planning things, sustaining focus, Citicoline can help with attention, controlling your attention and your processing speed, so how quickly your brain's running thoughts. Bacopa looks promising for new memory and having a calmer state of focus. Saffron, steadier mood, lower friction to start things, promising for neuroinflammation and also helping your libido. And as a reminder, these supplements are in addition to what you're already doing. So we know, things like the Mediterranean diet or Mediterranean leaning diet or an anti-inflammatory diet, these things are really tremendously helpful for brain health. So you don't want to skip the nutrition and just opt for a supplement alone. And then, of course, if you are pregnant, you're on medications, you're managing medical conditions, you always want to loop in your provider before you start any supplement. I promised we were going to talk about magnesium, so let's do that because what magnesium does in the brain is pretty awesome. So magnesium, really important molecule. It's so good to get it from your food, but not all of us can all the time. I want to talk about some of the research around it, but I like to think about magnesium is helping like buffer what's happening in the brain. So it naturally is involved with your learning and your memory. It helps prevent overexcitation. So that's where I'm talking about that buffering. It supports the GABA related, the calm break that we talked about. And it can help with protecting the brain health overall and supporting neuroplasticity. There's also been information coming out showing that it can help with brain inflammation. So we know when there's low magnesium that the microglia, that's the brain's immune cells, they can start to ramp up inflammatory messengers. And that can lead to what people call leaky brain. So there can be impairment of the blood-brain barrier. And that can also make it to where it's much harder to focus, much harder to run thoughts. You feel like you have brain fog. So restoring magnesium can help normalize these pathways. There have been animal studies where they have mimicked low estrogen states and then they used magnesium, and they found that magnesium can help reduce the neuroinflammation response that happens in the brain as estrogen declines. And much like exercise influences the BDNF alpha pathways, the brain-derived neurotropic factor pathways that help with your neuroplasticity, magnesium does this as well. And this is very much key for attention and memory, especially as we age. And the other great thing about magnesium is that while it's also supporting brain health, it's also supporting sleep. So magnesium can help with nudging your GABA tone and relaxing the nervous system. It can shorten the time it takes to fall asleep in some people, and it helps promote the type of sleep that supports your next day attention and memory. Now, it's actually been shown in people, this is not just theory, is that if you have a higher dietary magnesium intake, that's been associated with larger brain volumes and fewer white matter lesions when they scan people on an MRI. And in the study I am referencing, firstly, it's an observational study, but it was specifically in mid to late adulthood that they were looking at. They actually found that people who had higher magnesium, about 550 milligrams a day, had younger looking brains than their cohorts who were not taking in as much magnesium. There was also a 12-week randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial of older adults with cognitive complaints, and magnesium was found to have a notable effect on their executive function. Now, the study was small, but it did have a rigorous design, and it did show that magnesium helped with task switching and with planning. So these are some very key executive functions that we've already discussed in the podcast. As I mentioned before, magnesium can help support sleep. I love magnesium glycinate for women because that little glycinate molecule can be really helpful for sleep. And there was a study in older adults that found that magnesium reduced sleep onset latency by about 17 minutes, which are modest benefits, but honestly very meaningful. If you're somebody who's like, I toss and turn for like 45 minutes, getting like 17 minutes off of that, that's pretty significant for somebody who's having that kind of sleep struggle. Now, there was another recent randomized control trial with magnesium that also showed improved sleep quality and deeper sleep stages in adults who had sleep complaints. So that is really interesting as well, especially when you consider I talked about the hot flashes waking you up, the fragmented sleep, disrupting your deep sleep phases. So magnesium may be helpful there. In mild to moderate cases of depression, magnesium supplementation has also been shown to be really helpful in reducing some of those symptoms. There's another really common symptom in perimenopause that's happening in the brain, affects brain function, affects concentration, and we just don't talk about it enough, and that is migraines. And migraines are definitely an executive function disruptor. Magnesium has been shown to be helpful here. So the American Headache Society recommends 400 to 600 milligrams a day of magnesium. They're often recommending oxide or citrate. That much citrate might give you diarrhea. Okay, so just be careful, but they're recommending 400 to 600 milligrams a day for prevention. And the overall evidence, I will say, is modest, but the safety is really good. And when you start to look at, okay, if you have migraines, we can use magnesium as an intervention. I typically use 300 milligrams of magnesium glycinate twice a day, 5 days before the expected onset of a migraine. Because in women, we tend to know it's going to be around ovulation or it's going to be right before menstruation. In perimenopause, it can become more unpredictable because in late phase perimenopause, you may throw a migraine anytime because God knows what estrogen's up to these days, right? So in those cases, 300 milligrams twice a day, every day is just the way to go. Now, why magnesium matters for executive function, brain health, neuroinflammation, mood, is because if we can stabilize signaling in the brain for like GABA, NMDA, and support BDNF alpha. I know that's like a whole lot of acronym soup, but we can support signaling and plasticity with magnesium. We can support the brain and how it runs its focus, its working memory, its task switching, the domains that sometimes make it feel noisy in midlife. We may be potentially able to keep the brain feeling and acting younger, and we love that. And like I said, if you're taking magnesium citrate, there's a risk of having diarrhea. If you're taking other forms of magnesium, like magnesium glycinate, threonate, less risk of having those. You shouldn't have them, but you might be the one person who's like, oh, it was me. I had it. And keep in mind that higher magnesium intake is tracking with a healthier brain structure, measured on an MRI, so you can actually see it. And that is a hint that better magnesium status may protect our tissues over time. Remember, I said that getting it from food is also important. So leafy greens, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, whole grains, chocolate. We always love it when I say chocolate, right? Those are great sources of magnesium. Unless you're a migraine person who has migraines triggered by chocolate, then you hate me. I'm sorry. That's the worst. I'm sorry for you. If I could take that away, I would. So when we talk about supplementing outside of the migraine conversation with magnesium, the RDA is 320 milligrams a day for women, 420 if you are a man. The RDA is just the bare minimum to avoid a deficiency. So I think we need research to tell us, is that actually the best levels to be taking in every day? Especially in the wake of research showing 550 milligrams is associated with a younger brain. So with the RDA, I think it's a good baseline, but take it with a grain of salt because the RDA is we're just doing the minimum to keep you from developing a disease. It doesn't mean it's optimal. And so what you may need may be different. And I think that it's always important to honor that. I say that as somebody who did the dual track of didactics and nutrition science when I was getting my degree. And why I've come to this stance here is because of the contradictions that happened when I was in school, watching the dietitian track say, oh, this is what's best, follow the RDA, da, da, da. And then being in the scientific track and actually looking at the science and being like, the RDA is not so great, not so great sometimes for certain populations. And so that's where I think that's one of the biggest issues with medicine, right? We're not looking at the individual. It's not bio-individual. There's just these blanket statements, recommendations, and then we expect everyone to fit in the box. And when you don't fit in the box, you're the problem, not the box. The box is the problem for some people. As long as I'm talking about magnesium, I also want to note that if you've long-term used a PPI, certain diuretics, you might have lower magnesium and you may need to supplement and your provider may not be checking that. You can do a red blood cell and RBC magnesium, see what your magnesium levels are. But if you're struggling with brain fog, cramps, even heart arrhythmias, you don't want to just be like, I have a heart arrhythmia, I need magnesium. But you may need magnesium and I want you to talk to your provider about that. So the bottom line is that as we age, magnesium is going to help your brain stay balanced, connected, calmer. It supports executive function. It supports healthy brain tissue. It can help with neuroinflammation. It may help you keep a steadier mood, better sleep, less migraines, less headaches. And we want to always focus on food first because there's a lot more in your food than just the minerals. And if you're eating the foods in the diversity to get magnesium, you're getting a whole lot of phytonutrients as well. And I have an episode with Dr. Kara Fitzgerald I will link to, and you'll know why you want all of those. Then we want to consider supplementation, and we want to tailor the dose for what our goal is, the medical context, to what health conditions we have, if we're actually able to meet the daily requirements through diet. So I've talked about supplements, but I want to give you some more tips before we wrap up today's episode to help with brain function, especially if you're in the early phase perimenopause. I think this is something you should start right away and keep this habit ongoing. And if you haven't started it, today's a great day. The habit is deep breathing. And you can do box breathing, inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale 4, hold for 4, repeat. Or you can do inhale for 4, exhale for 6, which is going to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. It's basically what works for you. That longer nudge of exhale helps your nervous system calm down. Leveraging your breath is a great way to also stimulate the vagus nerve. And that helps with neuroinflammation as well. So deep breathing is more than just you feeling zen and chill. Deep breathing is also going to help with your brain function. So we also know that those who practice mindfulness and meditation do have better cognition and brain function. So trying to incorporate that in your day-to-day life. And look, mindfulness can be as simple as paying attention to what you're eating, smelling it, tasting it, chewing it. Please chew. Please chew your food. But we don't have to overcomplicate these things. We can integrate them into our day-to-day life. I want to reiterate that if your brain is already experiencing static, you need noise canceling headphones or earplugs. You need to put your phone on focus mode. You need to turn off all notifications at work. You could just let people know, hey, 20 minutes, I'm going into a sprint. I just need to focus. I'm turning off everything, because the less input you're having into your brain, the more it can use its energy for the task at hand. I would also encourage you to structure a bedtime routine that's nourishing your nervous system. Warm bath and shower, dim lights, screens off before bed, 60 minutes is, if possible. Maybe doing some puzzles, some reading, some things that are, seen as just like frivolous and extra and like who has the time for that, are really important to give your brain wind down time and to give time off. I would also recommend to start some brain training apps or doing puzzles or anything that is especially novel to help your brain be trained and stay sharp. So there are lots of apps that help out there with training your brain, keeping it young, keeping it sharp. We need to be doing those. And if you can pick up a new hobby to support neuroplasticity, to support your brain, I think that's a wonderful thing to do. Like something like maybe ceramics, something like dancing, something that is physical, that you are moving, that you are using your body with, is another way we can really help to support our brain through the perimenopausal years. And there is so much research out there about supporting brain health, about preventing Alzheimer's and dementia, but not a lot of it is just focusing on perimenopause and menopause and the struggles that we have. So we definitely have to go through and look at what the research is saying in terms of promise for preventing some of those conditions and asking, could this benefit us? And if it's yes, and there's no risk, start implementing these things. And the last thing I want to say is talk to your clinician about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. If you're finding you have rumination, if you are finding you have night sweats, hot flashes, and sleep disturbance, that even once you've corrected the underlying issues or maybe started hormone therapy, your sleep issues persist, because this is something that we don't always talk about, that just because you fix the underlying issue doesn't mean it fixes the habits and the behaviors that developed from that. Now, before we close out today, I want to talk about removing the ovaries before natural menopause and how that raises your risk later in life for cognitive problems. So first thing, if you have your ovaries removed, they should be considering estrogen therapy and continuing that estrogen therapy. So what the evidence shows is that early loss of ovarian hormones matters greatly. So whether it's an oophorectomy bilateral, you remove both your ovaries, or maybe they're putting you on Lupron long-term, they should not be doing that. But some people do that, and I don't like them. Or you have functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, and you've lost your hormones, and no one's giving you hormone replacement therapy. And, maybe that happened at 35, and then here you are at 45, and now you're going into perimenopause. So we know these hormones matter greatly. So when it comes specifically to the oophorectomy, which is the big word for taking your ovaries surgically, we know that if that happens before natural menopause, it is linked to a higher long-term risk of cognitive impairments and possibly dementia as well. And we know that women who lose their ovaries, the younger the surgery is, the greater the risk. Okay, I'm going to put this study up so that you can see it. So what has been found is that premenopausal bilateral removal of ovaries, those women have higher odds of mild cognitive impairment and poorer cognitive test scores 30 years later compared to their peers. So this isn't some short-term brain blip. This is a long-term impact on your cognitive health. There was another study that came out in 2019 that showed that women under age 45 who had surgical menopause, that was associated with a higher dementia risk, and that surgical menopause at any age was tied to faster decline in verbal memory and processing speed. So what brain imaging is showing us is that women who are premenopausal and they have had their ovaries removed, they show reduced white matter integrity years later, which is consistent with long-term brain effects of abrupt estradiol loss. So what is at the crux of this? They take your ovaries, your estrogen drops rapidly, and you have none. So this is what I was talking about with my Lupron story. And I can't even believe there are doctors who do that to like 20-something-year-old women for like years. I can't even imagine. I went months and I was losing my mind. I thought I was going to lose like a grasp on my reality and my life altogether. So the question is, right, does estrogen therapy help? Yeah. So the evidence is looking really good there. So there has been evidence suggesting that if estrogen therapy is started after a premenopausal oophorectomy and continued, they've looked until about the age of natural menopause. So they've looked at like whatever age you were, they take your ovaries, we start you on estrogen. And then menopause is on average about 51 years old. Okay, what happens then if we no longer have estrogen? So the excess cognitive risk that we've been talking about has been largely mitigated when given estrogen and it's not contraindicated. So this aligns with the idea of the critical window for estrogen's neuroproduction that you've heard me talk about in other episodes. So giving estrogen within 10 years of menopause can offer neuroprotection. And it's not that like past 10 years you get no protection at all. It's just not as good. It's just not as good, and it's a missed opportunity. And the Women's Health Initiative did us all dirty, and it is seriously the Women's Health Initiative and what clinical practice became after that was one of the greatest disservices ever done in women's health. But that aside, let me give you some context here. So hormone therapy is not used to prevent dementia in women who reach menopause at the usual age, but after surgical menopause, Most expert bodies consider hormone therapy to reduce several adverse outcomes like bone loss, cardiovascular disease, urogenital conditions like increased risk of UTIs and pyelonephritis, kidney infections, and is very likely, based on the research we have, that it also can protect your brain. So what I'm talking about here very specifically is not that you had natural menopause and not what we talked about at the start of this episode. I'm talking about you abruptly lose your ovaries in your 30s. You were never meant to go a couple of decades without having that estrogen, okay? And that's why we have to consider estrogen hormone therapy here. And it is a replacement therapy at that point. Now, when it comes to removing just one ovary, it's been found that there's an increased cognitive risk after unilateral or bilateral oophorectomy if it's done before menopause. Again, younger age, higher risk, but the negative effects is more consistent and abrupt with bilateral removal. So why I say this is that if your doctor's like, well, we're taking one, we might as well take two. No, if there's no reason to take two, leave one in there, because while you will experience some cognitive decline in most cases, that one ovary may offer a little bit of protection. And listen, just because you retain your ovaries doesn't mean you're in the clear. So you may still need to be assessed. You may still need hormone therapy, because there have been some studies showing that a hysterectomy, even when you keep your ovaries, is associated with higher risk of dementia in certain age groups. And so this all underscores that gynecological surgeries and abrupt endocrine changes have major brain repercussions. And part of the surgical conversation is we have to be having the conversation about what comes next with hormone therapy. Because if you have your organs removed, you should definitely be offered hormone replacement therapy if you're a candidate. Even if you retain your ovaries, if they're not functioning optimally, you should still be considered. So if you're listening to this right now, I would encourage you to avoid elective ovary removal before age 50. If you're an average risk person, there's certainly conditions when you might want to consider it. So you know, if the ovaries are being removed because you're high risk with the BRCA gene, there's compelling indications, then you need to discuss hormone therapy at least until age 50 to 51, unless contraindicated. But honestly, there's no reason just to stop at 51. We're starting most patients, right, around that age. So why would we just stop you? We don't need to. But the research has shown that, like, in terms of cognitive health, like if you stop, then not as negative effects as if you had never started it altogether. If you're going to go in for a surgery, baseline cognition, sleep, mood, cardiometabolic checks, have all of that, all your symptoms tracked, all your labs done. Recheck that 6 to 12 months post-op and make sure that, like, things are still going well. And if you are someone who has had a hysterectomy, you've had your ovaries removed, and you're listening to this, know that the things that we talked about in this episode can help you too. So the exercise we talked about, the anti-inflammatory way of eating, drbrighten.com/plan, go grab it. You can start implementing that, making sure that you are doing something to safeguard your sleep. So I don't want you to feel like, okay, I made a mistake, I had my ovaries removed, and it's game over for me. It's not. There's lots of things that you can still do. And it sometimes feels overwhelming, right? Because there's so much that you can do. But I don't want you to look at it as like, I have to do all the things. It is, what is the thing that I can implement right now that can move the needle most? And listen, before we leave this podcast, I should also just mention again, sleep apnea, thyroid, iron deficiency, B12 deficiency, long COVID, depression, anxiety, certain medications can also be contributing to your brain fog. So maybe you had a hysterectomy, but you've got these other factors going on. Make sure you work with a provider who is working you up thoroughly and can investigate everything that could be the cause of why your brain is struggling. Now, as always, Thank you so much for being here. I know this was a long episode and a whole lot of information. Again, if you want to grab the Radiant Mind, POD 15 gets you 15% off. And for a limited time, we're throwing in the Magnesium Plus as a thank you for trusting in me and my team to bring you the best quality supplements. Always third-party tested, always screened, and always making sure that we are using the highest quality, sustainable ingredients manufactured in the United States. If you can take a minute, leave me a review, let me know what was helpful about this episode and what else you would like to hear more on the Dr. Brighten Show. Please let me know, because I am always searching for guests and topics that will fill the need of the information gaps that you have and help you live the healthiest life. So until next time, take care of your hormones and they will take care of you. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. If you could like, subscribe, or leave a review, it helps me so much in getting this information out to everyone who needs it. If you enjoyed this conversation, then I definitely want you to check out this.